Hi, everyone. Welcome to Knowing the Science and the Story, presented by the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking Winter Internship class. Thank you so much for coming. To begin our presentation, we interviewed New Jersey residents and asked them what they thought human trafficking was.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. When you hear the word human trafficking, what comes into your mind?
In my personal opinion, human trafficking in any age range is it involves selling your dignity to earn money. This may include sexual intercourse with strangers, sexual touching, sexually pleasing a man or a woman just to earn a living for a day. This may be with or without your consent. It may also depend on the actions that will be taken.
The guy I met on the train, he told me that foreigners or people who has power give them certain visas and they somewhat give them the they give them a way to go to America, but in exchange of that, they become slaves basically.
The act of selling a human being for either sexual reason or for labor. That's what comes to my head when I hear human trafficking.
Okay. Where do you usually think it happens the most?
I feel like it happens mostly in the South along the border of like Arizona, California, Texas. I feel like, I don't know, that's where I hear it mostly happening,
Mm-hmm.
exchange between Mexico and US.
What if I tell you if human trafficking also occurs in the USA, especially in New Jersey? Would you be surprised?
In my opinion, yes, I would be very surprised because I feel like New Jersey is a very quiet state. I
Uh,
feel like not really much happens here.
yeah,
So
like there's
hear
not
that
not
is
much in
kind
news,
of
right?
terrifying. Oh dear.
Human trafficking is obtaining a form of labor or sex act through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. This is done through violence, manipulation, false promises, etc. And it can happen in any community, at any age, to any race, any gender, or nationality. In the cases of children, the prevalence of force, fraud, or coercion is not a necessity for classification as a human trafficking case. We are now going to go into some of the different types of forms of human trafficking.
So survival sex when an individual exchanges sex acts and their body for basic needs, for example, shelter, food, etc., without overt force, fraud, or coercion. This is a type of exploitation where individuals are being illegally transported and forced to commit sex encounters. Approximately 28% of street youths and 10% of shelter youths reported having participated in survival sex. Who and where can it happen? It can happen anywhere: home, spas, hotels, escort jobs, etc. People that are targeted are women and children, but men and members of the LGBTQ plus community are also targeted. It's estimated that 14,500 or 17,500 of people are trafficked in the U.S. each year, based on research on New Jersey Human Trafficking Task Force. 80% are survivors of sex trafficking, based on U.S. Department of Justice. It is also known that New Jersey has the potential to be easy for traffickers to navigate and enter other states, but due to its convergence, there is no reliable statistics the research have determined, which is why many aren't aware of this case. Finding cases about it is hard. The idea of prostitution is very tricky. Since many cases go unreported, many didn't know they were sex trafficked. Traffickers often use a number of tactics, promising a better life, debt bondage, manipulation, or threat towards their family or individuals. Sex trafficking can start anywhere at work or at home. A tactic in which often goes unnoticed is the boyfriend or friend tactic. The boyfriend and friend tactic is a type of grooming. It's a tactic that can be used both on social media platform, video games, or group community chats, or in person, work, school, or even in your neighborhood. Traffickers do so by first showing friendliness, expressing an interest in the person, will do anything in their way to start finding out the person's dislikes, what their favorite things are, and their favorite habit, or anything they will do in their daily lives. Buying the person a gift, trying to gain their trust, knowing where and what the person is doing, etc. This tactic is similar to domestic violence. Once traffickers feel like they are in full control of the individual's life, it becomes more difficult to escape. So to explain further more about survival sex, I would like to share a story about Michael. Michael is a 19-year-old LGBTQ youth, second year of college, lives with both of his parents who are very conservative, which makes him insecure in coming out of the closet. He feels trapped and no one to trust. He goes to an app where people of the LGBTQ community can make friends and chat. He met someone from New York and became friends and felt comfortable. One day his father discovers all the messages from the app. Michael gets beaten up and kicked out of the house. With nowhere to go, Michael calls his friend for help. His friend picked him up and went to New York to live with him in his home. With no job and not wanting to feel a burden for his friend, the friend took advantage and offered him sex in exchange. Realizing his friend's true intentions, he wanted to get away, but with nowhere to go, his friend threatens him to stay and do as told.
The next form of human trafficking that we're going to discuss is familial trafficking, which is the exchanging of someone by a family member, often in the form of sexual exploitation for compensation like money, drugs, etc. When it comes to children, it's typically a family member, and with adults, it's typically an intimate partner. Familial trafficking tends to target individuals at a much younger age compared to other types. Therefore, children are often the victims of this type of trafficking. In fact, a child's first trafficker is often a family member. However, it is important to note that familial trafficking does not only happen to children and can happen to anyone at any point in their life.
The spectrum of intent in familial trafficking refers to the family member's awareness in trafficking their own relative. Typically, the member responsible is purposefully exploiting their relative in hopes of direct compensation. However, in many cases, the familial trafficker intrinsically believes that they are bettering their own relatives' lives, ultimately unaware that their actions are contingent with those of human trafficking. Examples of this unaware spectrum of intent include situations in which the family member presents a relative with an occupational or educational opportunity that may actually serve as a gateway to being trafficked. Now, why does this go unnoticed? First and foremost, ignorance. People tend to assume the best in other people, as there's a general inclination to believe that family members, specifically people who love us, would not take advantage of us, and therefore victims tend to not question their intentions. Further, some parents and guardians use fear as a form of discipline in their own households, coining the phrase, "what happens in this house stays in this house." So ultimately, there's instilling a sense of fear within victims in order to mitigate prosecution, as well as even awareness of the fact that they are victims itself. Further, in America, there is a patriotic bias concerning human trafficking, as there's a positive misconstrued concept that crimes of that nature do not occur in higher developed nations. And this is further even seen in New Jersey itself as a high developed state. Further, there is, again, that difficulty in identification as familial trafficking takes place in family networks, which are often extremely private and therefore extremely difficult to track and gather evidence on in terms of prosecution. There, of course, is that aforementioned tendency to assume the best of people, and it runs even deeper when concerning family, since familial bonds hold that inherent trust. Consequently, many of those in the life are not even aware of the fact that they are in the life, and this issue is heightened in familial trafficking since it often victimizes children who are more susceptible to the inherent loyalty and depend greatly on the family structure, making cases of familial trafficking extremely difficult to prosecute. And because of this, the indicators for familial trafficking tend to be different than indicators for other types of trafficking. Specifically, the process of grooming is often seen in cases concerning familial trafficking.
To go more into depth about grooming is the using of close proximity to take advantage of the child's developmental stage and inability to verbally express concerns or safety issues. This technique has 6 steps. Traffickers try to identify those who have unmet needs, for example, material or emotional needs. By saying they have the same or similar likes and dislikes, the same dreams, the same problems at home, helps the trafficker gain the victim's trust. The third step is meeting those needs that the victim has. Using the trust that they have built with the victim believes that the trafficker is just genuinely trying to help them. Once the trafficker meets the victim's needs, they begin to cut them off from the other people in the victim's life. This increases the victim's dependence on the trafficker. In exchange for meeting the victim's needs, the trafficker exploits them, and the trafficking aspect of the victim's life becomes normalized. They are often manipulated into believing that they are the one making the decisions. The trafficker maintains control through a variety of methods like threats or financial control. A rewards and punishment system is often used, and the trafficker cycles through acts of violence and acts of kindness, creating a trauma bond.
The main aspect that makes familial trafficking unique from other forms of human trafficking is that the trafficker is directly related to the person in the life. So to demonstrate this concept, think of a hypothetical case of a girl subjected to involuntary marriage. Forced marriages are largely seen in cases where familial trafficking is concerned, as family members have easiest access to in inconspicuously arranging marriages as a result of assuming that our family intends for the best for us, or even cultural customs as aforementioned in our presentation. The girl's family may live paycheck to paycheck while trying to support both parents and numerous children. The family may not be able to feed the number of mouths in the household, and therefore the girl's mother resorted to exchanging her child for money, temporarily relieving the family's financial crisis. And dependent on the type of marriage arranged, this case may classify as both sex or labor trafficking, which will be discussed throughout our presentation. However, it is the direct act of the girl's hand in marriage being exchanged for monetary compensation by their own mother that makes this case one of familial trafficking.
So labor trafficking is like modern day slavery in the United States. It's also a form of human trafficking where victims are made to perform a task through force, fraud, and coercion. In contrast with survival sex trafficking, the three factors of force, fraud, and coercion must be present to determine a case of labor trafficking. Otherwise, the case would not be considered labor trafficking. So, for example, labor trafficking can take place in factories, hospitals, and even car washes. Now I'll be giving three forms of labor trafficking. First, child labor is a form of work that harms one's health, physical, mental, spiritual, moral, and social development of children and can interfere with their education. Although candy selling isn't necessarily considered labor trafficking, in some cases it can be when there's force, fraud, and coercion involved. Next, we have forced labor. This is where victims' freedom is restricted and to a certain degree of ownership is exerted, meaning limited. Lastly, bonded labor and debt bondage is when victims' work is greater than the original sum of money borrowed, meaning they work more and get paid less.
We see statistics of human trafficking or any type or of any types on Google, but are they really reliable? Now, to some extent, it definitely relies on the sources of which these cases have been obtained. However, they are only estimates and are far from the real numbers of cases that happen in the US and in New Jersey. According to researchers, a reason why it's difficult to obtain accurate number in labor trafficking specifically is due to the nature of the action. It's criminal behavior and sort of the unclear definition that might be presented with these numbers, and that can also reflect the uncertainties and the inaccuracy of also under recognizing its victims. And as mentioned before, anyone can get involved in trafficking, and labor trafficking is no different. So these numbers does not make labor trafficking any less important or prominent. But again, it's very misleading to think that any of the numbers or statistics you see online can be inaccurate reflections of the cases. It's very important to be aware of where you get your information from when you decide to share it with someone. Fair trade labels. This is a way in where companies can actually build trust with their customers, and that they tell them that the products is made as fairly as possible. Now, the label is beneficial in that it gives the customers the transparency that they deserve or need, and that they know that the products are made with no illegal actions involved. Now, the companies that can be fair trade certified can be from food, drinks, clothing, shoes, even bath products and jewelry. Some of them include Nisolo. This is a shoe company, Honesty, Everlane, this is a clothing company, and Lush, it's a bath product company. And even some companies actually went far to only use fairly traded products such as cocoa powder in the case of Ben and Jerry's. And also the Fair Trade International is responsible for the World Trade labels, and a lot of companies you can actually like see the packaging in their products. And then red flags. Now here are some of the signs that might indicate signs of labor trafficking. But before I go over them, it's important to know that each sign must be viewed within an individual circumstance or situation for it to be identified as a labor trafficking. So for example, like no one red flag can be a sign of labor trafficking. In fact, there has to be like multiple red flags for it to be a sign of concern. Some of them is recruited through false promises concerning the nature and conditions of the work. So, for example, false advertisement of modeling on social media can be an example of that. Then unpaid, paid very little, or paid only through tips, and be brought to workplace illegally or with temporary visas. Now, for the last point, it might be a little misleading because maybe some people could think of like human smuggling, but like as we mentioned earlier, human trafficking can happen at home, and labor trafficking can also be a type of that. And again, it all comes back to the story and the signs of the individual.
Labor trafficking often goes unnoticed because those most vulnerable are largely migrant workers isolated from family, friends, and oftentimes lack documentation. According to researchers, of the 14,000 plus who received support from the state, 78% were trafficked for sex and 22% for forced labor. The International Labor Organization estimates worldwide that there are 246 million exploited children aged between 5 and 17 involved in debt bondage, forced recruitment for armed conflict, prostitution, pornography, the illegal drug trade, the illegal arms trade, and other illegal activities around the world. So if you or someone you know is a victim of human trafficking, the National Human Trafficking Hotline can help. Call toll free at 1-888-373-7888 or text at 233-733. Be free. For labor trafficking, we will have two situations. And so I will be giving situation one, which is debt bondage through labor trafficking. So there's this family from Iraq who wants to come to America, but they have to have certain documents to do so, and they need assistance. In exchange to get those documents that they're in need of, they are forced to work until the debt is paid off. And the trafficker wants them to work illegally with no pay. But because of the hours the family works for the trafficker with no pay and the extent of the debt, it would be impossible for the debt to be paid off and for them to work elsewhere to make money for the proper documentations that they need.
And for situation two, we have a boy who is documented, so it's a little different from situation one. I'm sorry. So for situation two, it says a boy saw a social media ad for a modeling opportunity, so he checked it out. The recruiter promised him a better life and career. Little did he know that he would join a travel sales crew with the exploiter, traveling to communities far from home. To keep him controlled, the trafficker would threaten the boy and the crew using physical and emotional abuse. The sales crew would often go door to door, selling magazine subscriptions and other goods, with little or no salary. So from these two narratives, you guys can see that labor trafficking is prevalent and prominent, and it can happen both globally and universally.
Hi, everybody. After presenting, now we're going to apply and reflect on the information that was given. So to begin, what are some elements you learned about human trafficking that you didn't know before?
I personally think that the diversity of the survivors was definitely something I wasn't aware before. I knew that I knew that women and children were targeted, but men and also people of the LGBTQ plus community were also targeted. So that was new for me. And then what was also new for me is that people can actually get trafficked and like go to their own homes as well. So someone cannot only be trafficked outside of their country, but can also like get or like can also experience that within their own shelter. So that was new for me.
With what Miriam was saying with our own countries, I also didn't really understand the degree to which it occurs in New Jersey and in America itself, because as we mentioned during the familial trafficking subsection of our presentation, people generally hold a bias that America as a highly developed nation is free of crimes such as human trafficking, when in actuality, according to the Department of State, over 200,000 recorded cases occur within the United States every year, and that's only the recorded and reported ones. And in New Jersey is in the upper 50th percentile of these recorded cases comparative to the rest of the state.
Also, one thing that kind of made me realize is that that it's easy for traffickers to lure anyone. So before I learned about these different types of human trafficking, I first also thought that it only happens outside in the worst neighborhoods or like in the in the undeveloped countries. But then I learned that it's not true, and that it can also happen in here and anywhere, especially closer to you at home or in your own neighborhood. Since also now that with new technology that we're putting in our daily lives, it's easy that for traffickers to make new tactics, and also for us not to be aware of the red flags because of the lack of information. And also it's kind of scary as well to know like the lengths these type of people can go through in order to trap others. Also, this kind of makes me want to know that we should always be looking into our surroundings, since it's easy to ignore and also not notice certain signs. And because of distractions nowadays, with the idea also of living in a first world country, we also get too confident that something like human trafficking never happens. Also, one thing that I noticed is that the media and also movies, there has been a lot of misinformation about these cases, and many people unfortunately rely on these movies, and that's a problem because they're making this type of crime seem as some sort of like science fiction, and that we're not actually concerned about like their reality, also about those people that they go through to this unfortunately fact, which also makes everybody wonder and also question like what are the difficulties to those in the life faced in seeking help.
As mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's a spectrum of intent when it comes to human trafficking, specifically familial, and a family member could be unaware that they are putting the victim into the life because they may believe that they're providing the victim with a better life, and therefore the victim may also be unaware and not seek help. They might not see it as victimization, but if the family member is aware and is purposely exploiting them, the victim still might not seek help if they believe that their relative has their best interest in mind, when in reality they do not. Family members are supposed to trust each other and not put each other in danger through exploitation.
Traffickers also use a variety of methods to prevent those in life from actively seeking help. And first and foremost, they use intimidation and fear, specifically violence and threats of violence. And they may also incur debt for the person in the life to establish a sort of financial control. And additionally, they may make the person in the life feel very isolated, especially if they come from supportive base that is very lacking, specifically if their family or friends are not supportive of them. Additionally, they could create trauma bonds between themselves and the person in their life, and a language barrier or fear of law enforcement could also prevent somebody from seeking help.
So with that, what are some of the warning signs that an individual is being trafficked?
Okay, so some of the warning signs that an individual is being trafficked are signs of physical injuries and abuse, avoiding eye contact, social interactions, and authority figures such as law enforcement, when their answers appear to be scripted or rehearsed, the lack of official identification documents, living with an employer, poor living condition, multiple people in cramped spaces, inability to speak to an individual alone, submissive or fearful, and being overly tired. Why is it so important to incorporate human trafficking to be taught at schools?
So when it comes to conversations that are generally considered taboo, like human trafficking, our public school system tends to want to ignore it. However, this would actively feed into the stigma that surrounds it. So it's a necessity to break this passive approach to issues, because limiting unawareness on the topic has a direct correlation to limiting the occurrences of it. And as we've seen throughout numerous portions of our presentation, the population has a genuine lack of knowledge concerning the extent of human trafficking, especially in the interviews that we conducted interviewing general New Jersey residents. This was evident. And so education is extremely important as a preventative measure, because enabling the people that may experience human trafficking in the future with the tools to understand the signs or to understand that they themselves are being trafficked minimizes the longevity of the act itself. And so what are some of the myths and misconceptions generally believed that by the population that they need to be educated on?
One of the myths that I used to believe in is that you can only get trafficked by strangers, and that was not true. In fact, human trafficking has like its own subtype, which is the familial trafficking, where someone can actually get trafficked by their own family or someone that's close to them, like a friend or a boyfriend or a girlfriend. So that was definitely new for me. And also like I wasn't aware of the factors, of the three factors, the force, fraud, and coercion that must be present in human trafficking. In fact, like I thought that someone must be like someone might be doing it out of their own will to survive, or also like something that someone must be moved or like kind of recruited from their country to come here or anywhere to work or to work or have like a better life. So getting trafficked from their own homes is also a myth that I think many believe in. And so to conclude our discussion, thank you guys for coming and having this wonderful conversation. And after knowing the signs and the story of the survivors, I think it's important also to learn about some of the legislations in place to help the lives of the victims and survivors right now.
Moving into the second portion of this video, we will now be speaking about the legislative aspect of human trafficking. Human and labor trafficking is a universal matter that needs to be brought to people's attentions so we can change the stigmas against it, the misconceptions, and the extensive rate of human trafficking that is apparent within the world. We hold high hopes that you could learn a lot from this video so it could grab more people's attention so we could end the horrific amount of trafficking that is happening all around us. What is human trafficking in legal terms?
Human trafficking, also known as trafficking in persons, or in other words, modern-day slavery, is a crime that involves compelling or coercing, using force or fraud on a person to provide labor or any other sort of services, including sexual services.
There are a lot of common misconceptions and myths that are around human trafficking. A lot of people hear different stigmas against it and just assume that to be a fact. But in reality, there are a lot of myths about human trafficking that people need to be made aware of. For example, a myth that a lot of people believe is that those who are a victim get in trouble with the perpetrator.
The fact is, if a victim is comfortable and want to seek justice, they have every right to be able to go to law enforcement and seek to get justice from their perpetrator.
Another myth is that human trafficking is only with people you do not know.
The fact is, in reality, people can fall victim to this crime from anyone. It can be a close friend, a family member, or someone you work with. There is no set image of who a trafficker can be.
Another myth that a lot of people believe is that human trafficking is only outside of the United States across the borders.
The fact is that human trafficking happens everywhere. It can happen in any country, it can happen in any state. The reality is that New Jersey itself is a hotspot in the United States for human trafficking.
Another myth is that women are the only ones who are trafficked.
The fact is that men can also be victims to human trafficking. Both men and women can be trafficked. This is a dangerous misconception because it can cause men to not look for the signs of human trafficking activities, and if they fall victim to human trafficking, it might prevent them from reaching out for help.
Another common misconception about human trafficking is that children and kids are the only ones who can fall victim to human trafficking.
The fact is there is no set age group for human trafficking. A victim can look like any age group. They could be a child, they could be a middle-aged person, they can be one of the elderly. The age range is from 7 to in the 70s.
Another myth is that human trafficking is always by force.
The fact is, physical violence can be involved, but in a lot of situations it's not. Some victims are controlled by traffickers, but through psychological means. It can happen through fraud, coercion, and convincing. If a relationship was built between the abuser and the victim around trust and emotional connection, this can cause someone to fall into their trap the abuser set up for them willingly.
Another myth is that the victim always realizes that they are being trafficked.
The fact is, there is no set time frame for someone to realize they're being trafficked. Some might be manipulated from a young age, from grooming, where the abuser builds a relationship with the victim, where they gain their trust and build an emotional connection with them. In that situation, they might not know what's going on until it's too late. Even afterwards, victim might not know they were victims of a crime due to not seeking help immediately because of the lack in resources. They might blame themselves or being directly trained by traffickers to distrust authorities.
Another myth is that human trafficking is the same thing as sex trafficking.
The fact is, human trafficking can take on so many forms. It can include labor trafficking, familial trafficking, and so much more. Human trafficking is not limited to only one type of trafficking.
Another myth is that you are always held against your will as a victim.
The fact is, people can go willingly, not fully knowing what's going on.
And another commonly believed misconception about human trafficking is that it is always violent.
The fact is that, again, it can take so many different forms, and sometimes those forms are hard to detect because of their nonviolent nature. Through coercion, through manipulation, there are other ways for a person to fall into human trafficking.
The next piece of legislation that we will be focusing on that has played a beneficial role in the fight against human trafficking is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. So what is this bill and why was it created?
The Trafficking Victims Protection Act was created to focus on how we can prevent human trafficking, but also how we can protect and prevent treatment to those who have survived their own encounters from activities of human trafficking. This legislation helps build a better future for everyone because it works on what can be done to help stop trafficking from happening in the first place.
It is important to combat both sides of this issue. We have to find ways to prevent this from happening, but also provide assistance and care to those who have been affected by it. This piece of legislation was created to help prevent, protect, and treat those who have and could potentially be affected by human trafficking. So how does it do that?
That's a good question. This piece of legislation evaluates the law that involve the crimes of human trafficking and provides enforcement behind those pieces of legislation. In order for a law to be beneficial, there has to be enforcement behind it. That's why it's so important to have legislation that fights back against human trafficking to make sure there is some type of barrier to protect those against it. It also takes a step back to examine what we already have in place, and reviews the costs and organizations and the availability of those services to help survivors of human trafficking. If there's anything missing, recommendations of legislation can always be added in.
You bring up that this piece of legislation leaves room for things to be added in. Why is that so important?
It's important because the way that things are done are constantly changing. The threat of human trafficking is constantly changing as well, due to what is presented in the media and through other forms of communication. A lot more people nowadays are left more vulnerable to being taken advantage of through social media. And people of all ages, not only women and children, but men as well, can become victims to human trafficking activities. So social media has allowed abusers access to more people. For example, more abusers have access to younger kids due to younger kids being online at a younger age. A common dangerous stereotype of human trafficking is most people are abducted or taken advantage of from people that they don't know. But in reality, most survivors that get taken advantage of is from their friends, family members, people they're acquainted with. This bill helps promote a coordinated response to help victims of human trafficking. With every problem, there has to be an equal response to it.
You stated that anyone can be affected by human trafficking. Do you think this piece of legislation helps fight back against the stereotype that only young women and children are affected?
Yes, because it promotes more of a public awareness and provides ways for people that don't know who to go to get help. For example, it shines a light on the 24-hour toll-free hotline that is available to anyone to go to. This hotline provides someone to talk to if they feel like they have no one else to go to. It also provides training courses and other educational materials for people to use to educate themselves of signs of suspected human trafficking activities and how they can help. We need to push back against an area that this only happens to a specific type of person, because it puts people that might not fit in that box in danger due to not believing it can happen to them.
This piece of legislation is key to prevent, but also to protect and provide treatment for survivors of human trafficking. This bill is up for renewal this year, correct?
That is correct. It is crucial that this bill gets renewed because of the benefits and resources that it provides. We have to continue to support this bill because it calls attention to the increase in human trafficking cases in New Jersey and around the United States and around the world. We have to make sure people are aware of the dangers and know the signs, so if they're ever in a situation, they know what to do. It's important to make sure people don't feel alone and make sure they have access to resources that they can rely on in time of need. That's why it's important for this bill to be renewed.
Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act. The next legislation we will be discussing is the Stop Enabling Sex Trafficking Act. What does this act do?
So basically what it does, and it's really something that has an enormous impact on some of the difficulties that you see when you're fighting human trafficking. Firstly, it removes the current legal shield for internet advertising of child sex trafficking under the guise of free speech. As we all know, it's sometimes really difficult to kind of control what may be happening on the internet, especially when it's dangerous or it's illegal. And, through this act, we have legal law enforcement has a greater chance of being able to do something through that. And again, we see so much of human trafficking being advertised online and happening through the internet. So again, it's just incredibly powerful for this bill to be allow people to do something against that. Furthermore, just being able to prosecute websites which are knowingly helping to promote sex trafficking in its own is a huge aid in the fight against human trafficking. Again, and it just has so many implications for human trafficking survivors after they are able to escape.
What ways does the bill help the legal side of human trafficking?
Sadly, even when these survivors have gone through so much after being trafficked, it seems like sometimes their struggles just don't end because of the legal effects of their experience. This act gives victims the right to go to court against those who profited from their exploitation, and it's allowing enforcement of laws that prosecute their perpetrators and just allow those who profit from these crimes to finally be held accountable in court.
That is absolutely true. It seems to be so difficult for human traffickers to be prosecuted and for victims to seek justice that they deserve and should rightfully have.
Exactly. And this act is crucial in forwarding that legal movement. It has a huge impact on the amount of people that are trafficked online because of its ability to specifically stop the advertising and selling of children when they're being trafficked. And again, just beyond that, it's a major aid in the actual justice in court for these victims. And it's really giving them the support and aid that they deserve.
Following, we will now be discussing what the vacatur bill is. What is the vacatur bill?
The vacation bill had been put into place to do away with ongoing trauma experienced by those who were once human traffic victims. Our legislators understands that traffic victims are not responsible for the criminal activity in which they have been forced to engage in or commit. This bill was entertained, embraced, adopted, and passed into law by legislation in January 2021, and by 18 states, with New Jersey being one of those states. Just like the word vacate, the vacator bill deals with vacating, doing away with crimes committed by survivors during the times they were trafficked.
What is a common misconception about the vacatur bill?
Well, the vacatur bill is not a get out of jail for free card, but rather it eliminates charges human traffic victim receives as such crimes were committed under duress and forced upon human traffic victims by the powers that be, via kidnap, through a pimp, through someone that was very familiar to them, who promised them food, shelter, money, or even citizenship in exchange for those minor crimes being committed. In summary, this law in itself does away with nonviolent crimes.
How does the vacatur bill differ from other human trafficking laws?
Well, it provides relief and it removes a victim from remaining in a powerless situation where they are no longer burdened by or in debt to. It decreases traumatic experiences. And without this bill, human traffic victims can't become gainfully employed, receive educational assistance, qualify for affordable housing, apply for loans, or in some cases, pursue their citizenship.
Why is this law so important, and what assistance does it provide to human trafficking victims?
Well, it's important because once a victim has been vacated, they're vacated. They cannot be retried for something that has been vacated. And it's very important, again, because it assists them with having new beginnings, allowing them to be a productive citizen to our environment.
Next, we will be speaking about the Debt Bondage Repair Act. The Debt Bondage Repair Act was implemented to support victims of trafficking by stabilizing their financial circumstances. As a United States Senator released the following statement: financial exploitation and forcing victims to work to pay off debts are revolting facets of human trafficking. This legislation will ensure that debt accrued while being trafficked cannot continue to damage victims' financial reputation long after the abuse is ended. The debt bondage bill allows for the Consumer Report Agency to not furnish a consumer report which consists of adverse information that resulted from a severe form of human trafficking. In this situation, the courts will decide what percentage of debt was a direct result of being a victim of human trafficking. What is the target population of this bill?
The targeted population for this bill is the poor and marginalized, those who have migrated from other countries, trafficked or discriminated against, mostly men, women, and children. It's also the indigenous people, observed in impoverished communities, and those who have been outcasted. Oftentimes, these individuals give themselves into slavery as a form of security against a debt or loan, or when they inherited this debt or loan on behalf of someone else, perhaps a relative. It can be made to look like an employment agreement, but one where the worker starts with a debt to repay that becomes impossible to repay, and sometimes inherited by another family member. Because they are trying to pay off that debt, they still need to survive. They need to be able to eat, they need shelter, they need clothing, they need their basic necessities. However, in the process of them doing that, sometimes it becomes very impossible for them to fulfill that debt. It's often compared to slavery, yet it's prohibited in the United States. And to further victimize the victim, the perpetrators often open up accounts on behalf of the victim, take out loans, and it ruins them and it prevents them from becoming prosperous in the days and years to come. As a victim, your credit is assessed. Key factors are weighed in relating to debt obtained. And if it can be proven that the debt is a result of one being victimized, such as being a human traffic victim, such debt can be eliminated and charged off by the government.
What does this bill do in summary?
Well, in summary, it gives the victim a new start.
The next piece of legislation is Bill A883. The goals of this bill are incredibly crucial to the efforts to end human trafficking here in New Jersey. Why exactly does this bill matter?
So to put it simply, this bill publicizes and gives information to a huge amount of the public, a huge number of people. So basically it allows for a poster about human trafficking awareness to be put out in public places like bus stations, train stations, motels, bars, strip clubs, massage parlors, hospital rooms. And these are all just areas that are, firstly, there's a lot of foot traffic happening. There's a lot of people here, but there are also places that victims potentially might be at some point. So it's a great place for them to be able to get information from these posters. It provides the national hotline single memorable number, which is 888-373788. So basically these victims and survivors, they have access to this resource wherever they may be, and it's just helpful for them to their experience, so they can, wherever they may be, they can potentially escape. And then lastly, another big part of this bill is that it provides a trauma response through the hotline, and it allows survivors to have a choice on whether they'd like to go through with law enforcement. It's just a very educated response to give them the best support they can have.
To sum it up, it is a bill that would be incredibly helpful for survivors and victims.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, this bill is an amendment. It amends the Human Trafficking Prevention, Protection, and Treatment Act to direct the Commission on Human Trafficking to broaden its mission of developing public awareness, to include awareness of victim remedies and services, including the creation of the poster, the public awareness sign I mentioned earlier. And again, this bill just further requires certain establishments to post that information, and having that information be as accessible, be as spread out, is incredibly important to the fight against human trafficking. This particular part of this bill was founded by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and it just provides victims victims with the up-to-date resources. It gives them the opportunity to have law enforcement available for them. It provides them with all the facilities they need to be able to communicate with others and to be able to work past their experience.
What are the ways that this bill would directly be beneficial within New Jersey?
So the way I see it, one of the most important parts of this bill is the fact that it gives people who are currently victims of human trafficking with information, with aid, with resources. And these posters, again, are just being put in places that are where a high percentage of human trafficking in New Jersey happens in. So we're talking about motels, hotels, and all these public areas, hospitals, all of these things. They're just places that at some point, for us, it may seem like it's in plain sight. We're talking about public transportation, but it's just something that you never know where they might be, wherever they may see this information. So it's just crucial to have it wherever we possibly can. And again, even if it's not like a victim of human trafficking, the general public should be aware of the problems, the high amount of human trafficking that's happening. The more we're able to inform the general public, the more we're able to fight and prevent human trafficking from happening. So it's just incredibly important for both of those reasons.
These victims deserve to see their perpetrators be held accountable in court, and for that, this bill is incredibly important. What is the bill S-3433?
So this bill is actually a current campaign that's happening right now.
What exactly does this bill do?
So it enables survivors to be able to make new lives for themselves after the ordeal of being trafficked happens. It expands the existing list of crimes that can be vacated from their records, and the crimes that occurred because of their because of being trafficked. And it just allows survivors a chance to find a job, to be able to rent a home, and kind of be able to participate in their lives in ways that may have prevented them before. It's just another step in them for rebuilding their lives and coming back to their lives. And again, it's just incredibly important for these survivors of human trafficking to be able to have the support and effort into making sure that they're able to grow beyond that. So, because of that, we need to put effort into making sure all of this passes. This is a link to a resource that will help you learn who your senator is, who your legislature is. And for everyone here watching, I hope you all recognize the importance of being able to speak up, being able to reach out to your representatives and telling them the importance of these bills about human trafficking, bills that have already been passed, bills that are currently being passed, and bills that will be proposed in the future. All these issues and bills, they're helping us fight human trafficking as a whole. They're helping us protect victims, and they're incredibly important, and they need as much support as possible. So please reach out to your senator, reach out to everyone, and mention human trafficking, the Human Trafficking Prevention, Protection, and Trafficking Act. That's also up for renewal. Mention these bills that are constantly happening. The problem is that through these cycles of passing bills, there's this 2-year limit, and because of that, sometimes it's difficult to get bills passed. So through all the support, we can be the most productive, we can put in all the effort and make it worthwhile by getting these bills passed.
It is crucial that we as a society inform victims that they are not alone and should not feel as if it is them against everyone else. It is pivotal for people to be aware of the overwhelming amounts of human trafficking occurring all around us, and the precautions you should take to make yourself aware of your surroundings and the relationships that you are involved in.
It's important we recognize the issue that exists in society that enables human trafficking to happen to the degree that it does. And so through these bills and legislation, we hope you understand the impact that your support has on the long-term change and the long-term fight against human trafficking.
All these pieces of legislation provide resources and opportunities that people can go to so they can reach out. People can go to if they need to reach out for help or someone to talk to. It's important for people to know that they're not alone in this. And if they're not ready to reach out, they know they have the resources to go to when they are. People need to know the signs to protect themselves, but also pass along that information to others. To stop this crime from occurring in the future, the legislation that has already been passed and those pieces of legislation that will be passed in the future helps prevent, but also protect those who are survivors of human trafficking.
Without these bills, there is a great possibility that ongoing trauma can roll over into depression. For our victims, suicidal tendencies can come to surface or manifest. They can develop addictions as an outlet, develop additional psychological disorder, and be further victimized and be dehumanized.
Thank you all for taking time out of your day to watch our presentation. We hope you were able to gain a more clear understanding about what human trafficking is and why it is so important to get involved in the fight against human trafficking. Thank you for watching.
As a future FBI agent, I vow to work to protect children.
As an advocate, I vow to make sure there's always resources available to survivors so they know they're not alone.
As a future criminologist, I vow to search the light at the end of the tunnel.
As a future lawyer, I vow to seek justice for victims.
As an advocate, I will be the shoulders for my survivors to lean on and convert their voices to actions.
As a social worker, I will push for and advocate for change.
As a background profiler for law enforcement, I vow to help and protect those who are wrongfully convicted in jail to be set free and live a normal life like everyone else.
As a future lawyer, I vow to fight alongside those who face injustice.
As an advocate, I will always push for social justice and ensure injustices will always be exposed.